Hello and welcome where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm Peter Lavelle. I'm joined by George Szamuely, my co-founder of the Gaggle. George, looking at media coverage of, and there's not very much of it, media coverage of the foreign policy team that's been assembled around Joe Biden, and you and I have been watching the campaign. I don't know if there's going to be another debate. And if there isn't another debate, there'll be no foreign policy discussed at length, okay? Outside of Kamala Harris's, pearls of wisdom, I mean, these talking points are just so nauseating. So it's not really part of the campaign. But there are people in the Biden orbit that have some very, very dangerous ideas about foreign policy. Why do I say dangerous? Because we've already seen these policies in action, and they have resulted in disasters one after another here. There's no learning curve here. Particularly, I mean, and obviously, the issue of Russia is very, very close to me. This is where I live, okay? But we see the same kind of poisonous, unthinking, aggressive posture towards Russia in the Biden orbit. It doesn't bode well for the future if, in fact, there is a Biden-Harris-Biden administration.
Yeah, I agree with you. The few pronouncements that we have heard from Biden and Harris have been extremely belligerent toward Russia. They're talking, well, we're going to get tough with Russia, we're going to impose more sanctions and presumably other things. So increasing exercises in the Baltic, increases in exercises in the Black Sea. Presumably they're going to try and push some other countries into NATO, maybe Ukraine, maybe Georgia, maybe Bosnia and Herzegovina. So everything is in this kind of belligerent mode. But bizarrely, they also then say, but we must still have arms control. As if somehow you can have arms control in a kind of vacuum, So one day you're telling the Russians you will do this, 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 and this, and then we might talk to you. And can we actually sign an arms control agreement because they're very popular, and if we get a nice photo up signing something, it's going to do wonders for us electorally. It doesn't work like that. You want arms control, you have to have détente, because otherwise there's just no way that's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, the one of the biggest problems I've seen, and this has been going over decades now, and without truly betraying our age, George, you and I remember when there were real experts on Russia, real experts on the Soviet Union. And you remember, George, as well as I do, there was a lot of debate about the nature of the Soviet regime, the nature of Russian nationalism, the importance of the nationalities policy during Imperial Russia and in the Soviet Union. I mean, these were deep thinkers. These were smart people. But when the Cold War came to an end, it was all defunded. A lot of the people that you and I looked up to retired, because there was nothing really to study anymore. I mean, because they were political scientists and international relations theorists. They weren't historians. Now, some became historians later, but there was, there was a huge paradigm shift. And there's been, after the end of the Soviet Union, the funding dried up. And I mean, boom, did it dry up? And so what has filled the void are very rarely true Russia experts. They're more like democracy promotion experts or civil society experts, NGO people. And then, of course, you have these journalists that are masquerading, hacks as masquerading as journalists. And so it's very rare. It's very rare. And I compare my education when I was a young man. I mean, like Jerry Huff, like reading his, his tome. Okay, you could agree or disagree with him, but he knew what he was talking about. When I look at the mainstream media, most of these people don't have a clue of what they're talking about, and it's all emotion, it's all projection. It's like what the Democrats do to conservatives. It's voter shaming, but this happens on a foreign policy level, where the Russians are backward people, and that's why they support a backward authoritarian autocrat. Well, maybe if he came here and visited for a few months, learned a little bit about the language, he might have a more, I don't know, nuanced view, or actually look outside of your bubble. Okay,
Well, that's
well,
it,
how
and if
do
that's
you
why
feel
you got,
about arms control and all of these issues?
that's why you have the people who actually get airtime on television, or who get to write op-eds in the New York Times or the Washington Post. They really don't know very much about Russia. You got somebody like Malcolm Nance, who is the kind of Russia expert on MSNBC. I mean, the guy is just a kind of pathological Russia hater. He takes Russia to be the Soviet Union. Russia has always been evil. Putin, Stalin, Lenin, they're all monsters. And that there's an existential struggle between the United States and Russia, and unless we win this, then this monster will continue in its blood-sucking ways. That's the level of his commentary. Then you've got somebody like Julia Ioffe, who is a Russian emigre, but whose profession is to be a Russia hater. So that's the reason why she gets space in all the illustrious newspapers. She gets on television because her job is to say how terrible the Russians are. And here there's a difference between this kind of emigre, like Ioffe or Boot, and an emigre of an earlier generation. I mean, emigres of an earlier generation were, condemned the Russians, but they always said, "Oh, we don't hate the Russians, we just hate the communists. It's the Soviet Union we hate, not Russia." These people are just professional Russia haters. I mean, for them, I mean, it's just all they come on television just to say how much they despise Russian. And although they might say, "Oh no, I like Russia. It's just Putin I don't like." Well, Putin has won election after election. So if you don't like Putin, you obviously don't like the people who vote for him.
Yeah, I mean, I always ask, well, if he didn't win the elections, who did?
Exactly.
Well, they never
Exactly.
have an answer for that. One of the really strange things for me, and it's really unfortunate, is that the the collapse of the arms control agreements that we've seen over in this century, okay, with the end of the ABM treaty and all the way open skies and SALT is very much in play. START is very much in play, and the this, as you've said, wanting to have arms control, but they want to menace Russia on its borders. Okay, I mean, is Russia menacing American borders? See, when I ask people that, or I challenge them that, they just refuse to answer, because it's just because you know what, George? You know why, George? Because they see that the West and the U.S. they're morally superior. Well, that's not political science, okay? A realist. I think you and I fall basically into the realist category. You don't take those things into consideration. You look at the ability to project power, to project influence, hard power, soft power, and the use of resources to get what you want. Okay, but see, this bringing the moral dimension into it, it short circuits any kind of reasonable analytical thought.
Yes, that's right. And their refusal to appreciate Russia's security concerns is staggering. Given, and that's what I think is a result of their lack of historical understanding of Russia. Anyone who knows anything about Russian history would know that fear of invasion pervades Russian history. Going back to the Mongols, it goes back to the Turks, and then of course, Napoleon, and then two massive German invasions in the 20th century. This shapes the Russian psyche, shapes the Russian fear of attack. And so the notion that, well, we can expand NATO wherever we want, and the only thing that matters is whether, the country says that we want to be a member of NATO, and Russia just has to put up with it. No, of course Russia doesn't have to put up with it. No country has to put up with a foreign, hostile country on its borders. America doesn't put up with it. If the Russians tried to build a military base in Cuba, well, we saw what happened when they thought the Americans thought that the Russians were building missiles in Cuba. They planned an invasion. It was only Khrushchev's backing down at the last minute that an invasion was averted. So it's nonsense to say that, well, any country can just decide, well, we want to be part of this hostile military alliance, and the hell with what you think.
Yeah, but you know as well as I do, and probably most of our viewers here, is that if there is a concerted push to bring Ukraine and Georgia into NATO, NATO would be breaking its own rules. Countries cannot become members of the alliance if they have disputes with their territorial disputes with their neighbors. Okay, so again, Russia's breaking the rules, breaking the norms. No, it's the West that does this all of the time. It changes the rules, changes what it means, and breaks its own rules. I mean, China is accused of breaking open sea laws and navigation laws, and the United States constantly pounds away at it. But you know what, George? The U.S. never signed up to those covenants, okay? But it blames China. I mean, the hypocrisy is, remember when John Kerry said that large countries should not invade small ones? And he said in a public forum, and people laughed at his face. It's like, yeah, the U.S. shouldn't be invading little countries, okay? I mean, the hypocrisy just is no. Well, I want to finish on one note because I want to reinforce what you had to say because I think it's really important. In September of 2015, after Putin addressed the United Nations General Assembly, announcing that Russia would assist a fellow member of the General Assembly, Syria, because Syria had invited Russia in for assistance to protect its sovereignty. Other countries there, particularly the United States, was breaking international law by being there. That was the only time in the 22 years I've lived here, George, that people were genuinely afraid. War. Is this war? Are we going to war? And I mean, people endlessly ask me that, and they did it with fear, just as you were saying. There is an aversion to war here. There isn't a bloodthirst for it. Anyone that makes that claim doesn't know what they're talking about.
Yes, no, that's it. That's exactly right. It pervaded the Soviet Union. So even in the days of Stalin and Khrushchev and Brezhnev, there was always an aversion for any kind of an armed confrontation with the West. And if we look at the historical record, NATO was created before the Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact did not come into existence until the rearmament of Germany began in earnest, and clearly Germany was going to be a member of NATO. That was when the Warsaw Pact came into existence. So, if we look at, who was aggressing against whom, it wasn't the Soviet Union. And that's really the mentality. Any kind of an armed confrontation against powers that they see as stronger than they are. And they clearly, with just reason, see the United States as stronger.
And the Warsaw Pact did dissolve itself.
Exactly. NATO, unlike NATO. Yeah.
So NATO, to this day, a quarter century after the end of the Cold War, is a military alliance in search of a mission. And those 5,000 bureaucrats for NATO in Brussels, they're desperately looking for that mission. Maybe expansion. Okay, George, it was a great discussion here. We're going to obviously follow what's going on in foreign policy circles or the foreign policy swamp, whatever you want to call it, here on the Gaggle. If you like this, like, share, and subscribe, and a lot more ahead.